Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Well, welcome to this episode of the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. I'm David Wheatley, your host, and I'm joined by my good faithful doctors, Dr. Judy Brown and Dr. Rick Eigenbrod, who are my two mentors. I get into trouble for giving away their age, but they've got a combined significant number of years of doing this work ahead of me. So it's great conversations to have. And I posed them the question recently to noodle on and then for us to have a conversation on today, that how do strategic leaders get their team to stay strategic? And it's something that I've been coming across with a lot of my work. And so we're going to have a conversation about it. And Rick, I think you're going to start us off.
Okay. I realized what a rich question it was, and as I thought about it, I felt like I was peeling these layers. And the first thing that came to mind is, would you say the sentence again, please, David? And I'm gonna jump in right after.
Well, I'll make sure I get it. How do strategic leaders, I'm talking about C-suite leaders, get their team to stay strategic?
Simple answer: they don't.
All right. You've been listening to the Humanity Leadership Podcast.
I think I have, because I think, David, we all, we hear in that a very familiar set of dynamics where the minute you say, "How do I get them to?" you're already in trouble. You've set up a dependency relationship. You can almost hear yourself go back to when you were talking to your kids. How do I get them to pick up after themselves? So I think the first thing is to understand that you don't. What's missing here is they don't, that's not up to you to get them to. The question is, why aren't they taking on that responsibility? Now, there we can really start to peel the onion. Um, I thought about a couple of things that I might mention here as sort of hallmarks. One is the brilliant work of the wisdom of team, Katzenbach's work, and his distinction between teams and work groups. And the first thing he says is a team, one of the characteristics of a team is they're accountable for the whole. And this team isn't accountable for the whole. The boss is accountable for the whole, which means that they become a work group, not a team. The second is the brilliant insight of Lee Thayer, who said, the problem you name is the problem you solve. And what I think we all see with teams, particularly, is how little time they spend on problem naming. They're so pushed and feeling pushed to come up with solutions that the real work, as we've observed with teams, the real work isn't coming up with the answers, it's coming up with an agreement on how we name the problem. And so a couple of things came to mind. One is the word strategic itself creates problems. It creates a problem of, do we have a shared understanding of what that word means? And if I was in the room with them or whatever, I'd ask them to go up to the board and everybody write on a sheet of paper or a whiteboard, when we use the words, the need to be strategic, what specifically do we mean by that? Because until you have shared meaning, you just have this word that we all think we know what it means. We think we have shared meaning, and in truth, we don't. So that I think the notion of making sure that we have that. So I took a couple of notes. What's the shared meaning? What are we talking about when we say strategic? It can be very different. It can have to do with the nature of the task and the work to be done. It can have to do with time frame. Mhm. So, for example, Elliot Jock's work, about um, how far out do we focus? Is that what they're talking about when they say strategic? Um, and so this notion about first and foremost, I think that he's got to change the question. He can't get them to do anything. The question I would have is, why aren't they? In what way does it make sense for them to behave in the way they're behaving?
Does it make sense to them, for them to behave in
Act the way they're acting.
yeah,
Because at one level, we're talking about, yeah, we all agree we need to be strategic, but at a much more subtly dynamic level, they don't feel responsible for that. So one of the answers to the question is, in what way does it make sense that they're not being consistently strategic? One answer is because they don't feel responsible to be. He does. He feels responsible to get them to do it. So those couple of thoughts came to mind. Let me stop there, Judy and David, and see if that prompts any thinking on your part.
Well, and just before we go to Judy, I think one of the things that, in the instances of the conversations I've been having, quite often, one of the exercises we've done is build what I call an altitude chart, which says, let's look at the C-suite.
yeah,
How far out should you be thinking? How far out should you be looking? And what's the work that you should be doing? And let's have that conversation with everybody about that. And then let's look at the VPs. How far out should they be looking? What's the work that they should be doing? Now let's look at the directors. Same thing, and we build that. And so that's the clarity piece you're talking about.
Yes.
One of the challenges is though, and I come across this all the time. You've probably seen it many times too. Is that those people got promoted because they were good at the last job,
Yes.
and when the pressure's on, and when they're incredibly busy, and when there's major change going on, their natural tendency is to drop down a level to where they know they can perform,
right.
especially if the people beneath them aren't performing to the level that they would
Yes.
expect or want or they would demonstrate. And so there's this kind of squashing of the organization. And then the leader, he or she at the top of the organization sees this void being created, which is where the root of the question comes from is we've had the clarity, we know where we should be, and my team still keep naturally being kind of gravitationally pulled back down to a level beneath where they should be working.
It's
You
such
know,
a I'm sorry, Judy. It's such a familiar dynamic. Um, and it is. I mean, basically, what you're talking about is Elliot Jock's work. This notion about how far out do we work. There's another set of dynamics there where we regress to the mean under the kind of circumstances you said. So that becomes a part of a conversation we need to have with each other. So the question is, in a sense, to stop the dependency relationship. As long as I feel responsible for making you responsible, they ain't going to be responsible.
Mhm.
So how do we need to change the conversations such that that doesn't happen and we don't lose a sense about why are we looking at the boss?
mm,
We're accountable for the whole. Sorry, Judy.
so the a story that comes to mind for me has to do actually with looking at the boss when one should be looking at something else. And I've been really interested about what happens when people think the boss has all the experience and the smarts, and they feel like they don't because they're junior or they're new or they don't want to speak up. And what's the cost to the organization when that happens? My favorite example of that is the Air Florida crash that happened about 25 years ago in Washington, D.C. And what you had is uh, you had two guys in the cockpit. You had a captain who was very experienced and very sure of himself, and knew what really mattered. And you had a first officer who was pretty junior and not so sure of himself. And it was a lousy weather day. And the junior officer was walking up and down the aisles and looking out to see if there was a little bit of ice on the wings. And he thought there was. And so he would come back and report to the captain, "Sir, I think there's a little ice on the wings." And the captain would said to him, uh, listen, we've de-iced once. If we have to de-ice again, we're gonna lose more time. We're gonna have mad passengers. We just can't do it. We're gonna take off." So we insisted that they take off. And the first officer, the young guy, had his hands on the controls going down the runway. And the black box recording later said, you could hear him saying, "There's something terribly wrong here." They managed to get off the runway, but the plane was too heavy with the ice and they crashed into the water just short of the 14th Street Bridge. And the captain and the first officer died, and most of the passengers did. And people will say to me, "But what could he have done?" The captain insisted they were going to take off, to which my answer is, you can't fly a fully loaded plane with just one person in the cockpit. He could have gotten out of his seat and walked out the door off the plane. They would not have been able to take off. And then people say to me, he probably would have lost his job. And I said, true, but what he lost instead was his life. So this question of when there is rank pressure to not listen to the other point of view, and when there's uncertainty on the part of somebody who really is seeing something, but the culture is not such. I imagine a conversation where a person comes up to the CEO who wants to be strategic and says, "Look, what I'm seeing is this." And the boss says, "You're in the weeds. We told you to stay out of the weeds. We want you at a strategic level." When what the news from the weeds may be the thing that keeps the organization from imploding. So this tension between what people who are operating at a level and can see and can insist on a strategic, whether it's at the level or whether it's in the time frame, the impact that can have on dampening information they need to have in order to move ahead in wise ways is the thing that's most on my mind, given the way you guys kicked this off.
So that's like the first question should be, do I understand why they're operating at a level below where they
Amen.
so am I open to that? Am I listening
Yes.
to what's going on?
And
Then that takes me down one of two paths. Either once I understand it, yes, I understand it, and they're choosing to go down there because they're more comfortable there, or now I understand it because there's some kind of thing that they're seeing that I don't have visibility to that I need them to pay attention to.
well, or I might say it's not one of two paths, it's one of six paths, because Rick's got at least a list that long. It's that they're seeing something that I'm not seeing and that they think is important. Or Rick, for your list, they're being paid and to they're being paid for staying at that level. It's David, what you said, it's the job they had last, and under pressure, we all turn to that. Rick, what were your other things? Because you had a number of these.
Well, I think what you 2 are offering is just really rich, and it brought to mind a couple of other things. One is if people don't do nonsense, people can't we hate nonsense. So we say, "Oh, this doesn't make sense that they're operating that they're sort of regressing from or they're not being strategic. We agreed they would be strategic. It doesn't make sense that they would do that. Their behavior makes sense from
Mhm.
their point of view. Their behavior makes sense. Our job is to get inside their sense-making process, which drives their behavior. So he thinks they're not being responsible. They think they're being sensible. So what goes on here? Well, one of the things you could look at is, for example, what are they? What it's the old notion about we don't measure what we get what we measure. So let's go to the metrics. Let's go to the things we're measuring. What are we really measuring here? Are we measuring behaviors that we determine and defined and agreed upon or strategic, or are we really measuring productivity, the old metrics that went, as David said, at the lower level. So do we have agreement on how do we know if we're being strategic or not? What are the metrics? And understanding that, um, what we measure is what we get. The other thing that struck me is the reward system. They may say, yeah, it's okay, fine and dandy for you, boss, to say we should be strategic. But what my bonus depends on is something that's much more tactical or productivity based. So you can talk to me all you want about being strategic, but the reward system is set up to reinforce these behaviors, and therefore it makes sense for me and us to do that. So let's look at the reward system is another thing. And these are really subtle. We don't think about them, and the more anxious we get, the less likely we are to think about these systemic driving dynamics. And there's one that I've watched, and that has to do with their response to the boss's anxiety. If the boss comes in and is what the boss talks about and what the boss emotes about has nothing to do with strategy, guess what they're going to respond to? We know what the boss is anxious about. Our job is to keep the boss from being anxious. All the boss talks about is the numbers, the productivity, the delivery dates, all the things that are one level down. While in theory, we should be working at this level. And I think it's a very subtle but powerful driver of behavior.
But I think that's a great example because it's interesting because I could think of 3 or 4 real scenarios across different industries that it's the same thing. And if I am just picking one of them mentally,
Mhm.
where the the leader wants everybody to be strategic and to be looking up and out, and at the same time is constantly looking at
Mhm.
this year's performance, and the fact that the year's getting shorter, and it's becoming more worrying because they've got a meaningful mission that they need to address. And so her anxiety goes up when that number changes, and it feels like then the organization gets compressed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you, Rick, is the first 2 questions of our CEO here is, do I understand why they're operating too low? And then the second one is, what am I talking about when I get into the room with these people? Am I driving some of this
Right.
this dropping of the altitude?
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine a boss going into the room saying, "Look, we have a plan. That plan has to do with 3 years out. We are not gonna make we are not gonna make the productivity numbers that we have this year. I don't care. I don't care if we don't make it. That's not the point, gang." And they go, "Well, what about our bonuses? What about" "Well, let's talk about that." Um, I remember talking with a guy who was the head of a big financial services company, and, one of the things they did, and this is really, hugely unusual, they set goals. If you make the goals, you get the goodies. If they didn't make the goals, they paid up personally. So if they had a financial goal, because it was a financial service company, if they had a financial goal and they did not meet the financial goals, each one of them put up money out of their own pockets to meet the financial goals. And so can you imagine some version of that where the boss says, "We need to understand that we agreed that this needs to be done. It's not happening." That's not what's really important.
So I'll flip the script on you a little bit there, Rick, and maybe Judy will have a perspective on this as well. What if it's a large urban school district and the superintendent is saying, "But when you say this year's results don't matter, that's 100 kids that I've kicked off in the system that are already behind.
Well, I'd have to think about that, David, in some way.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
it. I
And it adds a complexity. That's the interesting thing, isn't it? And but the complexity drives at that urgency for for today's results. But I want people to be thinking about what we're going to do in the next 3 years to impact the long term sustainability of the district or wherever it may be.
That that would make me want to ask, where, when we look around this organization, can we see instances of of teacher behavior, learner behavior that has resulted both in improvements in learning and are at a strategic level. So rather than divide this world into two things, the question would be in the school, what, and there may not be, out of 50 teachers, there may only be two that you could cite who are managing to do this, who are keeping their eye on what we've called looking up and looking out, and are still getting really remarkable results with the kids. That's when I think you turn your organizational focus to that place where it's working, and figure out how to run more and more experiments on that.
Which the equivalent there would be really at that level in a large school system would be the principals. So which school is actually rocking it?
Yes.
That might
Find
be
out what that principal is doing that's generating that impact, because that's the strategic, because that principal is actually drawing kids to the school.
that's
Kids
right.
want to go there because of the results they're delivering,
Yeah.
which is the sustainable, the strategic side. And there must be something happening today that's improving results for that school. So that's the tactical side. And you're saying, hey, it's this balance between those two, and let's look for those hotspots and try and replicate them.
That's actually a really good term for it. It's looking for hotspots, and it might be beyond what you usually think you're looking for. It might be, as you said, the school head, the principal may be the answer, but it may be that the chemistry in the place is such that the parents are deeply involved, that there are all kinds of supports for the kids that are being created out of the possibilities. It's just a different kind of place. Um, but I think often, if you look further and further, you'll see these bright spots. And the question is, I think there are two questions: how to run experiments where you can have both. And then the other is how to watch for situations and where you're getting both, where you're getting the results, the human results you need, but you're not taking your eye off the ball.
Which
And
which really generates the fourth question that I've got now of my set, which is where's the evidence? Where's my executive that is strategic,
yes,
and what's happening there that we need to replicate?
yes,
Yeah. There are two things you two triggered in me. One is in the school system, David. It really reminds us it's a system, right? To what extent have we communicated to the community at every level that they understand this year may not be what we want, but here's where we're going, right? And so they don't have a narrow look when we are here trying to have a broader look. The system's not going to let that happen for us to have a broader look unless the system has a shared understanding and a shared perspective. The other thing that it brings up is quite sensitive, and that is, but in the schools particularly, but let's go back to the team because it's much more manageable. Do we have people on the team who are capable of doing what we're asking them to do?
that's right.
And I think about and I think about the work. Are they developmentally, if you want to put it that way, are they at a developmental stage where they can do what we're asking them to do? So, for example, let's look at Kagan's work, right? And the levels at which people operate. So at the lower levels, they operate in the what's in it for me, Everything is defined by what's in it for me. The next level is, what are the rules? Tell me the rules. I'll abide by the rules. And as you move up, they can do a number of things. One, they can handle levels of complexity. They have internal locus of control, not external locus of control, um, et cetera. Um,
I'm just putting up Kagan's on the right-hand side of this chart
uh,
for those who are
Oh, good.
yes,
um,
yes,
and
Impressive.
all I've done on this chart is put three different models on the same chart: our humanities four choices, Maslow's hierarchy, and Kagan's development stages, because there's some kind of impact. And I'm finding more and more that people who are at the bottom levels, it's nearly impossible for them to make transformative leadership choices.
exactly, David. And I think it's, because we don't think that way as business people, particularly. Um, it's just not it's not in the way we make assessments or we make determinations. For me, that line, that I don't know if I stole it or made it up, but it's brilliant. Who goes into the room has everything to do with what comes out.
Right.
And I think that sometimes we ask people in the organization to operate at levels that they are developmentally not capable of operating at. And if they're already in a room, it's really tough to acknowledge that. But I do think that one of the things is, look at what we're asking, watch their behavior. You don't have to give them a test, although they're fabulous tests. The leadership circle, I think, is another fabulous. What's his Robert Anderson?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his work is fantastic. It's a wonderful integrated model of development, and it connects leadership with the capacity, the levels of leadership with the capacity of the organization, productivity of the organization. It's real. We're coming to understand it's really real. This function of level of development. So I think you raised another one. Can these folks, are they capable of doing what we're going to ask them to do?
Which would make me then ask, what are we doing to provide developmental experiences for our people? So, and this has to do with how we can continue to have a rich bench. I mean, we can't just scrape all the guys off the bench who simply can't do this. How do we manage to have a deep bench? How do we manage to have the kind of coaching, developmental experiences, mentoring, and how can we manage to have serious conversations about this all along the way? That there was an idea that came to mind, David, when I was looking at your charts, and I thought this is an argument for multi-generational teams. That's me as a senior person seeing those charts. But there is power in diversity of all kinds in order to get what we're talking about. But one of the things may well be multi-generational.
It's kind of interesting because in some ways the Rick's saying, do we have the raw material? And you're saying, do we have the program to get the most out of that raw material?
Yes.
And one of the insights and in talking to somebody at one of the school districts I worked with was, how involved are the grandmas?
Yes.
There's quite a spark to get the grandmas involved because the grandmas have such power and authority.
Oh,
And I thought that's a genius idea to get the
Yes.
grandmas involved in that. But then the other thing that comes to mind as you two were talking there is, and I'm probably between the three of us only talking to myself, but in the rest of the world, their sports leagues are all very performance based. America, it's all very socialist. If you come last, you get the best pick next time. It's remarkable to me. But the rest of the world, it's all performance based. And so as people who are familiar with Ted Lasso and Welcome to Wrexham in America now have seen, you can get promoted. And so you can go from the fourth or fifth tier of soccer, and over the years, you can slowly get promoted. The reason I bring this up is that one of the challenges that they have, the team that wins the championship, which is the second tier, then gets promoted to the Premier League, and they ditch half their players. And the reason why is because they don't have the raw material to survive at this level. And so they all end up getting transferred to teams that are back in the championship. But some of them do have the raw material, and because they have the development, they'll keep them and they'll develop them. But that practice of when we grow as an organization quite dramatically or radically, massively, we have to review it. It kind of goes to Rick thing. We have to review our team and say who's capable of performing at this level. And I see
Okay.
this a lot in mergers when you see two organizations come together, and it's like the leader could manage a $300 million organization, but now they're leading a $600 million organization. Do they actually have the capacity to do that? And some of them do, and some of them need to go back and run another $300 million organization.
So I want to take another example of this sort of thing. There's a wonderful story at Ford Motor Company about a team that was put together with impossible financial demands and a very quick deadline, and managed to put together an extraordinary vehicle as a team. It was just stunning, and they saved incredible amounts of money for Ford, and they got done way ahead of the schedule, and everybody was so proud of them. And so when it was all done, they gave them all kinds of applause, and then they broke up the team and sent them because they thought they were so smart that they'd been able to do that, that they sent them out to do other things without realizing it was the capacity they had developed as a team that made that possible. So one of the questions, I mean, we're raising different kinds of questions on this, but one of the questions is, if I think about the principal at one of those schools who has an incredible teacher team and other support team, and there's the temptation to ship them off to other schools, the wisest thing may be to keep this chemistry together, because it in itself is collectively more powerful
Yeah.
than the individual bits of it.
And the challenge would be is what can we learn from that to replicate it, not to take it and plant it somewhere else, but to replicate that thinking. And
That's
I
right.
think that what's interesting is, as you were sharing there, um, in the proper football world, my soccer world, that you could see a coach with a team of the world's greatest players not do very well.
Yep.
And you can see another coach with a team of, mediocre but good players do really well. And the difference is how is that coach managing the team and the collective and the alignment, and how well are
Yep.
they fighting for each other? How well do they have alignment to the vision? And so it kind of goes to, are we understanding why they aren't playing for me? Are we talking about the strategy? Are we aligned as to what that looks like? Some of the conversations we've had doesn't matter whether we're playing football or running a credit union. It's the same keys, isn't it?
Yes, it
And I,
is.
and I think one of the challenges for me when I get in this situation is sometimes it's brutal that you have to cut players.
Yes.
There are two things that came to mind that you guys said I want to underline in different language. One is this fundamental understanding through unbelievably rich research that Robert Anderson found, and it goes as simply as this. The developmental level at which the people leaders operate will determine the performance of the organization. It's physics, it's a rule of nature. If
Mhm.
you take just a leader, it translates to the company can't outgrow the leader. So you could extend that as the company can't outgrow the leaders,
Mhm.
right? The second thing that fits then is who comes into the room is hugely important. And that when I talk with leaders about what's your high value contribution, you should be focused only on your high value contribution. They go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, how do I know that?" It's what you and only you can do. And one of the things that the leader in any team can do is decide who comes in the room and who doesn't. And then, David, I want to come back to the wisdom of teams and something you said, because there are 2 or 3 things that are hallmarks of teams versus work groups. One is they're accountable for the whole. The second is we produce results greater than the sum of the parts.
Mm.
And that's what you're saying is possible, if we do some of those other things. We have example after example after example of where somehow an organization, a group can produce results greater than the sum of the parts.
And you still need the raw material that's capable of, there's a certain entry level of raw material that's required there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain baseline at which you have to operate to be able to do that. My friend Jean Ritsunoya has a wonderful thing she does with teams. She walks in and she says, "What does this team need to produce, create, and be?" And
Ah,
nobody can say a word. They write on cards. Is
what are
that
the 3 words again, Rick? What does the team need to
what does
do?
this team need to produce, create, and be? Notice the be.
Mhm.
And at that point, if you did that and said, "Okay, let's discuss," what would happen. The most verbal people would do this, that, and the other. So brilliantly, as Jean often demonstrates, she said, "Okay, everybody write one thing on a card, and the cards go in the middle of the room, okay? And you can't talk. And you have to start wandering around the table and clustering where are the clusters, right? And of course, some people make a cluster here and they go, no, it doesn't go here. But you keep circling and circling and circling. And what amazingly happens is you get these clusters. And it was all nonverbal. You can't have the most verbal people in the room dictating. It's just seriously genius. But that, it's the nature of the work. I mean, she's just come up with a way for them to tackle the essential questions
Mhm.
that this group needs to answer.
So then the question was, how do I, as a CEO, get my senior leaders to be more strategic? The first answer was you don't. But then we came up with a set of questions to replace that to the CEO. Do you understand why they're operating too low? The
Right.
first one. What are you, as the CEO, talking about that's driving their response or
Right.
their behavior? What are you measuring and rewarding at this level? And where are my executives who are strategic, and how do I hold them up? And do the rest of these people have the capability to get there? Do they have the raw material? And I think the other thing that I heard you say, Rick, that the problem you name is the problem you solve. And you also named a bunch of leadership books, Leadership Circle by Robert Anderson and Wisdom of Teams. The one I'd like to add
Yes.
is What Great Teams Do Great. And that quote, the problem you name is the problem you solve. One of the biggest things we've found with What Great Teams Do Great is the teams that aren't successful skip what we call the setup box,
Mhm.
which is answering those questions. And it's really a more complicated way of answering the questions of what does this team need to produce, create, and be. But when teams skip over that and get straight into the what we're going to do,
Yes.
that's when they fall down. So Judy, Rick, appreciate the conversation again. That's another 40 minutes gone by very quickly. So I appreciate your time and wisdom today, and look forward to more conversations in the future.
Great fun,
Here,
guys.
here. Great fun.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanergy.com for many more resources.